My name is JC Sambana, and I am part of the Entrepreneur Services Group. I run the life science and healthcare IT practice for SVB for the early stage market. It's my pleasure to introduce the next keynote speaker, Ries, who many of you know is a serial entrepreneur and was co-founder and CTO of IMVU. But beyond that, he has recently published a book called The Lean Startup, which debuted at #2 on the New York Times bestseller list. So with your help, I would please help me welcome Eric, author, serial entrepreneur, and Mr. Lean Startup himself, Eric Ries.
Thank you. Woo. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks for giving me a very warm welcome. This is a hard day to do this on for obvious reasons, and I know Guy gave a very moving tribute this morning to Steve, and I don't know, I thought I would be fine when I heard the news. I thought it wouldn't affect me that much, and to be honest, it really has. And so I can't just give the usual talk. I can't do it. So I apologize if I'm totally incoherent for the next, I don't know how long it is. It's been really a difficult day. And I was thinking a lot about my very first computer I ever bought. It was a 1984 vintage beige Mac Plus. I bought it used. It was a physical object that really changed my life because I grew up as a programmer. Programming computers was something I did for fun. When I found out that you could get paid to program computers, that was one of the best days of my life. And I remember teaching myself how to program on that old beige Mac Plus, just doing it because I thought it was the most incredible thing I could imagine. Programming is a skill that lets you take imagination and make it real directly. It's such a gift, and so it's just feels like something really has been lost today. I was thinking a lot about. I used to have this volume of a book called Inside Macintosh. You remember this? It was a 5-volume set, and then they added a 6th volume called Inside Macintosh. It was the detailed book that told you all the system calls and all the details of how the Macintosh computer worked. I could not afford to buy Inside Macintosh, the set, and my local library had only volume 6. So my friends and I would just check out volume 6 over and over again. And we would try to infer what was in the previous 5 volumes from the corrections and additions that had been added to, they would tell you this system call is no longer available. We'd be like, oh really? And we'd immediately go start calling it to see what it did. And that was my introduction to programming. So it's been a long time that Steve Jobs has touched my life, like so many of us, and there's not a lot I can say about it, except to just want to be up here on stage and share with you that it has meant a lot to me. And so I was getting in the car to come down here, and I thought I was fine. I was like, okay, he died yesterday. I was sad. I got to get into game mode because I got work to do. And I turn on the radio just to see. I wonder if Steve Jobs made the news today. Just curious. And right as I turn on the radio, they decide they're going to play the entirety of his 2005 commencement speech at Stanford. So I came down here, I listened to the whole speech, and I have a confession to make. It was actually the first time that I had listened to it. I'm probably the only person in Silicon Valley who had managed to avoid listening to this speech all this time since he gave it in 2005. It's very inspiring. I'm sure all of you have seen it. But I hadn't listened to it because I've been really resisting the last few years the cult of personality around Steve Jobs. I hate the hype and the pretending like he is a one-man who built this entire company through his raw perseverance and vision and determination. Because as entrepreneurs, we look up to Steve. We want to know, how did he do what he did and how can we all do it? And all of us, I can only imagine, have spent this whole day thinking a lot about how can I do what he did? How does what I'm doing now live up to what the standard that he set for all of us? And the truth is, none of us really know how he did what he did. The biographies are yet to be written, and we'll learn more. But because we don't know, it leads a lot of us into wasting an incredible amount of time doing what I call putting on the black turtleneck, trying to put on a show about how we're just as good as Steve Jobs as best we can, copying the things that we do know about him, that he was kind of mercurial. And even in the Stanford speech, he makes a dig at Windows for copying the Mac. Remember that little moment? You're like, dude, you're giving a Stanford commencement address. You won. You don't have to punch Bill Gates in the face right now. Can't resist. So that he could be mean. He could be cruel. but he was a righteous jerk. So he meant it in the spirit of changing the world. So as entrepreneurs, we can forgive him. But that doesn't mean that if you are a jerk, you'll be successful. It doesn't mean if you put on a show of vision, you'll be successful. And when I first became an entrepreneur, that's what I thought it meant. I understood entrepreneurship from the stories that we see in the movies and that we read in magazines, the stories that are all being repeated today. Do you notice how in the obituaries and the biographies and the stories of Steve, as in all the great entrepreneurs, the story is like very simple. It's like step one, be in the right place at the right time, have vision to see the future, have the right idea, and just persevere. Make sure you work really hard. You just don't give up no matter what. Step two is kind of vague. It's like ... something happens. And anyway, step three is you get to be on the cover of magazines, and you and your co-founders get to sue each other, and you get to decide how to divide up the spoils. And that's honestly what I understood entrepreneurship to be. And it's been all over the TV all day today, all over the internet. I can't look on Twitter, find out anything else about the most interesting and exciting parts of the story, step one and step three. In fact, I learned today an anecdote about Steve I didn't know, that when Time Magazine decided to choose the personal computer as Man of the Year, he called them up. They were profiling him as part of that story, and he called them up repeatedly to try to convince them that they had made a horrible mistake, that he should be the one who was Man of the Year. So this is not someone who exactly didn't care what other people thought of him. Contrary to public belief, he thought it would be a terrible mistake, and he was probably right. It probably was a terrible mistake. That's the thing so irritating about these stories. How are you going to live up to the ghost of Steve Jobs? You can't do it. And yet, the parts of the story that we know, the parts that are interesting, the parts that are fascinating to us, I think are actually the least important parts. When I first became an entrepreneur, I told you, this is the story I knew, the three-step process. And so I was in college, and I had what I like to call the first half of the movie The Social Network experience. I did everything just like in the movies except for the ending. Everything else was exactly the same. We had a great, brilliant idea. We were in the right place at the right time. In 2001, we had the idea that college students should create online profiles for the purpose of sharing. Doesn't that seem like a good idea? I've heard that somewhere, but we were convinced that they should share them with employers for the purpose of getting a job. So close, right? So close, and yet hopelessly far away, I'm sad to admit. And, in the movies, as I said, it's an act in three parts. So we were there. We did the hard work and the perseverance and being in the right place at the right time with the right idea. And in the movies, step two, I said we kind of gloss over it. I call it the photo montage. It lasts usually like 1 or 2 minutes. It just, you see them like pounding on keyboards and drinking some beer. In The Social Network, they draw on those really cool windows with the markers. Remember that scene? I love that part. We did that too, of course. All college entrepreneurs, that's how it's done. And then you can move on to step three. And my question is, why is the photo montage so vague? Why is there no dialogue in the photo montage? Why does it only last 2 minutes? And how come we never talk about it as entrepreneurs? We only want to talk about acts 1 and 3. The answer is, the sad truth, the photo montage is really boring. It's excruciatingly boring. It's unbearably boring. Think about what happens in the photo montage. We're all entrepreneurs here, so we know. What happens there? It is things like product prioritization meetings. Who's been in a product prioritization meeting recently? Yeah, okay, pretty much everybody. Who felt like it was movie-worthy, really interesting? Wishes there was a camera crew there? Of course not. It's too boring. It's things like deciding which customers to listen to and which to ignore. It's things like deciding the most difficult thing of all. How do you know if it's time to pivot, or should you persevere in your vision? It's the stuff that we never talk about. It's too boring, and yet I believe that 95% of what determines the outcome of startups happens during the photo montage, in the boring parts. And that's, for all of our vaunted lionizing of Steve and how great he was and the great ideas that he had, it was the building of that organization that could do the boring stuff exceptionally well over many years that is the thing that I honor him for today. And so how do we get better at the boring stuff? We're not going to do it by reading more profiles of famous entrepreneurs because they don't talk about the boring stuff. It's too boring to make it into the movies. It's too boring to make it into the magazine profiles. And yet I really think that's what we need to focus on. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but entrepreneurship has gotten cool all of a sudden. And that's not good. Entrepreneurship is not cool. Let's be honest. Entrepreneurship is boring. It's painful and humiliating, and you want it being wrong all the time. And that's not cool. So for those who understand what I mean, winter is coming. And we need to be ready for that. There's going to be a time when entrepreneurship will go back to being uncool and boring. And then we can really be focused on the things that are true about entrepreneurship, the things that actually allow us to create organizations of lasting value. So that's like a really complicated way of saying that my initial startups, most startups I've ever built or been involved with, have failed. And that's not how you're supposed to start one of these talks. I know. I'm off message now. It's like, hi, I'm an expert, and most of my companies have failed, and if you follow me, you too can have most of your companies fail. But look, anyone who's telling you the truth about entrepreneurship is going to be talking about failure all the time. Because contrary to what we read in the magazines, when you get down to your last dollar and things look bleakest, and in the movies, that's always when the first customer walks in, right at that last moment when things are darkest. And just through sheer perseverance, you just barely manage to get the plane to achieve liftoff. But in real life, the people they don't make movies about are people like me, who when you get down to your last dollar, you then immediately proceed to your 0th dollar. And it's over. So how can we prevent that from happening? That's what I want to talk about. And as a technologist, as someone who grew up programming computers, I thought I knew the answer to that question. It was like, well, just be more like my idols and make better technology. So I spent 10 years as an entrepreneur. Most of that time, I spent trying to find better technology, better products, smarter people, better engineering methodologies, anything possible to make the technology better. And I kept having this experience that some of you may be familiar with, and if not, you're probably about to be familiar with, of building incredible products that nobody uses. They're amazing. They're incredible. They could have changed the world if only anybody was using them. And today, most of those products are sitting on a shelf. And if you think about that, that is not a technology problem. So what is it? That's what the Lean Startup is all about. I have been trying to figure out how do we prevent ourselves from getting into that horrifying position of building products that could have changed the world but didn't. And I think most of us right now, not you, of course, but the people to your left and to your right, are in the process of wasting their time building stuff that people don't want. And I think we are doing that on an industrial scale as an entrepreneurship ecosystem, that most of the companies we build, most of the products we build, actually have no impact on anybody whatsoever. And we're used to making excuses for that. Well, we're taking a lot of risk, and failure is obviously part of risk. But things have changed. It's not like it was in the old days when if you wanted to build a company around a new product, you had to take dramatic technological risks. I mean, none of us are working on teleportation here. If anyone's working on teleportation, by the way, please go do that. Don't be here. Get on that, because that's exciting. But the rest of us are living in a time when we can build anything we can imagine as entrepreneurs. So the thing that we're used to focusing our energy on, namely, can something be built, is really not the right question for our time. The question of our time is, should it be built? Is it possible to build a company around this series of products and services? And that is a really different question than our forebears in the 20th century would have understood. It's a new question built of our incredible capability, especially here we are in the Computer History Museum, especially because of the semiconductor revolution. Why? Because as I said, almost the first thing I said today, that software is imagination made real. So in an economy based on software, our future prosperity will depend on the quality of our collective imaginations. And, how can that not make you think of Steve Jobs? So what can we do with that imagination to use that precious commodity more effectively? That's what I think we need to be talking about as entrepreneurs. So let's start with a definition. What is a startup? See, we all think we know what a startup is. All of you are in startups, so we know it when we see it. It's obvious. But let's just think about it for a second. Bear with me for a second. Here's my definition of a startup. A startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So, therefore, entrepreneurship is a kind of management. That's why it's so boring, by the way. It's kind of management. It's just different than the 20th century general management we're used to talking about. It is the management discipline that deals with situations of high uncertainty. What is the uncertainty we face as entrepreneurs? It's that we don't yet know who our customer is. We don't know what product they're going to want. We don't know what the business model is going to be. We only think we know. We hope we know. We pretend to know. We try to convince everyone in our vicinity to believe a very important fact as if it was true that is not, strictly speaking, actually true, which is that after we build all this cool stuff, then customers are going to want it. It's very handy. The original term to describe this was the reality distortion field. That was a phrase coined to describe Steve's talent. And the problem is, if you're sitting there in the reality distortion field, you might be asking yourself this question. Not you, but maybe you have a friend. Your friend might be asking this question, which is, if I'm following a visionary who's got the reality distortion field, who can make people in their vicinity believe things as if they were true, they're not strictly speaking actually true, how do I know if I'm following the next Steve Jobs or I'm following a crazy person? Because there's another set of people who have the power of the reality distortion field, and we call them sociopaths. If you want to create a cult, it's very handy to be able to put on the black turtleneck and make up this field and then get people to believe things. So what do? Right? Should we put on a show about how visionary we are and we definitely can see the future? Or do we acknowledge that we don't yet know these things and our job as entrepreneurs is to find them out? I've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs lately. I have this book you probably have heard of. It came out, and I keep having to ask people this question. Do you want to be right, or do you want to change the world? Because most of us, when we think of our brilliant idea in the shower, it just seems so incredibly brilliant. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, the startups that I built, when I had that idea, everything I did, every person I talked to, every focus group I conducted, every research report I read, everything that happened reinforced my belief that my idea was completely right. It was just like I was collecting evidence everywhere. I was learning so much about how great my idea was. Nothing could dissuade me from it. Any of you ever had that experience? And then the problem is not that we shouldn't have great vision, not that we shouldn't really reach for the stars. The problem is that most of the time we're just wrong. The idea is almost brilliant. It's like I was saying before, online profiles for the purpose of sharing, except, oops, slightly off, a little bit off from the true business. And if you'd gone back in time to me in 2001 and told me, listen, Eric, you're almost onto something great, but you've got to ditch the recruiting thing, and you've got to create this online social network so that college students can poke each other, I would have been like, that is so stupid. Come on, I'm trying to build a real business here. Some poke thing. Give me a break. So I would have called Facebook, which is about to IPO for I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars, not a real business. And lots of us said that about the early days of Facebook. We couldn't tell that this was something that was about to be one of the biggest business successes of all time, because in the early days of any idea, it's impossible to distinguish between brilliant and crazy. Because it depends, the differences depend in subtle details on what's really true. Will customers engage in this behavior, and is it valuable for them to do so? So the only way to find that out, I believe, is to test those ideas empirically. So the Lean Startup is a scientific approach to entrepreneurship, where instead of asking the question we've all been trained to answer as engineers, as marketers, as product development people of any stripe, we're trained to say, how can I achieve the specification at minimum effort? We want to change that to say, how can I learn whether the vision is true with minimum effort? So it's a slight shift that says everything a startup does exists not to make money, not to serve customers, not to do anything except help us learn whether we're on the path to a sustainable business. So I'll give you an example. I helped found a company called InView, which today is very successful, and I'm very proud of it, blah, blah, blah. You know, all entrepreneur advice, it must drive you crazy. It used to drive me crazy. It's all like, hi, I did thing X, and then I got really rich. And so if you do thing X, you also will get really rich. It's like, so what? How do I know that thing X actually caused you to get rich? How do I even know that you got rich? How do I know that what worked in your industry will work in my industry? How do I know that what worked in the past will work in the present? I mean, it's really frustrating, these syllogisms that just say, oh, so-and-so did this famous thing, right? Steve Jobs put on the black turtleneck, and then he changed the world, therefore it's absurd. So don't listen to me because somebody told you that I got rich or I'm famous, or it doesn't matter. Ask yourself whether these principles can be useful to you and whether you could test them yourself. So here's the story. When we started InView, we wanted to create a 3D instant messaging social network. Because this was 2004, and instant messaging was still the hot new social technology. This is before Facebook. And we had this really good idea that everyone knows that instant messaging is a network effects business. People familiar with this? So the value of the network is proportional to the square of the number of participants, and therefore it's impossible to just bring a new instant messaging network, because since everyone already has an IM network, in order to switch to a new network, they'd have to bring all their friends with them. That's a high switching cost, and therefore IM is a business characterized by high barriers to entry. Does that sound familiar to anybody? People get that? When I talk to MBAs, and I do a lot of talks in MBA classrooms, this is the only part of my talk usually people start nodding to. They're like, oh, that sounds good. That's corporate strategy. We know what that is. And I'm like, well, if you like that, you're going to love this. Check this out. To avoid the problem of the barriers to entry, we will create an instant messaging add-on that interoperates with all the networks. And then when you use our product, it will be inherently viral. Because in order to use it, you have to use it with one of your friends. And whenever you did that, we would actually send a text link right over the IM client to invite the other person to download our product and join you in the chat. Doesn't that sound clever? Can't you just picture InView spreading through the whole IM networks as this like viral epidemic that's going to take over the world? It's a very compelling picture. I'm very proud of that strategy. It is excellent in every respect except one, and that is that everything I just told you is not true. But doesn't it sound good? See, sounds good are the two most dangerous words in entrepreneurship. Everything sounds good if you have a compelling speaker, who can tell you the principles of sound strategy. Most strategies fail not because they're incoherent and stupid, but because they're simply not true. Picture this. We would bring a customer into our office for a usability test. And they would say, what is this thing? We'd be like, it's this instant messaging add-on that interoperates. And then they'd be like, what is that? We're like, well, it's this add-on, and it will help you avoid having to learn. And they're like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Is it an IM network or not? And we're like, sort of, but not. And it was just a huge problem. And they'd be like, no, thank you. And we're like, listen, we're paying you to be here in this usability test. So if you want to get the $25, you're going to download this product. They'd be like, fine. And they would try it. And they would customize their avatar, and they loved the avatar part of the technology. And then here's what would happen. We would say, okay, now it is time to invite one of your friends. And they'd be like, no, thank you. Why not? Well, I don't know if this thing is cool yet, so I'm not going to invite one of my friends until I find out if it's cool or not. And we're like, no, but it's going to be so cool once you invite one of your picked. And they're like, not going to do it. And then we, of course, resort to that same trick again. Listen, we are paying you to be here. So you were going to do it. And I kid you not, more customers than not would not do it. They're like, keep the $25. Because on a list somewhere of commandments of mission-critical software, people who are in enterprise, whereas like people in consumer don't make mission-critical software, oh yeah? Try getting the phone call from some teenager when you've actually made them look lame in front of their friends. That's a list of commandments of mission-critical software. Like that is clearly number one. Do not make teenager look lame in front of friends. And we couldn't get them to do this key behavior that our whole strategy was predicated on. And so, to make a very long story short, we had to pivot away from the instant messaging add-on strategy. And I was really sad. Because I was the CTO of this company, the chief technology officer. My job was to make this amazing technology that would support this strategy. So we had worked day in, day out, killing ourselves for 6 months to build what we thought was what we would now call the minimum viable product, the least amount of effort necessary to discover whether our business is sound. We were very proud of ourselves that we cut so many corners that we could get it out in 6 months, but we were also a little bit nervous. Because any of you who are engineers in the room will know the saying, time, quality, money, pick two. Oh, that's just engineering speak for this product sucked. Okay, it really was bad. Because only 6 months to build it, it was this huge virtual worlds thing with microcurrencies and social network and photo share. Everything. And there's no way to make that work in that amount of time except to cut a lot of corners. And so the product really, I want to be clear. This would be about as likely to crash your computer as it would be to give you a delightful 3D avatar experience. And I want to come clean about that now. And so we were pretty nervous. And I was like, gosh, are we going to ruin our reputations by launching this thing? I had this image in my mind of, newspaper journalists are going to discover this product. We will launch it. They're going to write this huge article. Idiots at IMVU don't know what quality software is. Big mugshot of me there being like, don't hire this guy ever again. But we decided to get over that fear because we didn't want to spend years of our lives building something that nobody wanted, as we had done in previous companies. And so we shipped the product. And at first, I was actually relieved that nobody would use it. Customers wouldn't even download it to find out how bad it was. So it's like, well, at least my reputation is safe. That's good. And I was like, wait a second, hold on. How could I be relieved that nobody's even using it? That's terrible. This is the worst possible outcome. People weren't even getting far enough into our product to discover the horrible design decisions that we had made and how buggy our software was. And to make a long story short, as I said before, we had to pivot into this other business. And pivot is such a clinical word. It makes it sound so simple. Like in basketball, pivot takes 2 seconds and you move on. But, oh no, some of you see you're laughing because you know. Guess whose work had to be thrown out because of the pivot? You're looking at them. My beautiful software. My well-factored, well-documented, perfectly architected code, if I do say so myself. All of it, thousands and thousands of lines had to be thrown away because we didn't need all this technology for IM interoperability. The good code got thrown away, and the crappy, ugly code got thrown away. The code that was under test coverage got thrown away, and the code that wasn't. All of it. Failure is the great equalizer of quality. So I was pretty sad. And I asked myself this question. I said, wait a minute. Why did I even have to be here? If all my work got thrown away, couldn't the company have fared just as well without me? And I could have been on a beach somewhere, drinking a Mai Tai and having a good time. And of course, you all know the excuse I use to make myself feel better. It's the same excuse all of us use when we fail to execute. It's like, well, if I hadn't done this thing, if we hadn't put this product out, we wouldn't have learned this important thing about customers, right? Everyone familiar with that excuse? It's like last excuse in the book. You got nothing left. You can resort to learning. For those of us in general management know that someone who claims to have learned something, if you're a manager and you're like, oh, you learned so much, you're about to be fired. Why? Because someone who learned something, only two things is possible. Either one, they didn't put a very good plan together. So now they learned how to make a better plan. Great, fire that person. Or even worse, they put together a good plan and then they failed to execute it. So that person should be double fired. That's even worse. So is there any, I don't think it's that confusing why learning has become a four-letter word we try to hide from. And part of our goal in Lean Startup is to rehabilitate this concept of learning. Because in entrepreneurship, because of the high uncertainty, because no one really knows what the future holds, we're always failing all the time. We're always learning. But now go back to what I said before, that everything a startup does is an experiment. And so I used the learning excuse to feel better until I had this question, which really bothered me, which is like, wait a minute. If my goal for the last 6 months was to learn this important thing about customers, why did it take 6 months? How come the word learning is only coming up now as an excuse? My co-founders and I never used the word learning when we were talking about what to build. You know what our conversations were like. Every conversation was epic, drag-down arguments about what? About, do we really need this feature in the MVP or can we live without it? Can we even call this a version 1.0 if it doesn't have? Do we absolutely have to fix this bug or can we let it go? Okay, are we on time, on budget? Are we doing things with sufficiently high quality? But my question is, if we're building something that nobody wants, why would we be proud of having done it on time, on budget, and with high quality? It's like we're driving a car off a cliff and being like, oh, we're getting great gas mileage as we go over the side. It's embarrassing. And that was really put me into a serious depression because I was like, wait a minute. We supported something like 12 different instant messaging networks for interoperability in version 1. It had to be that way because, remember, we wanted to spread like a viral epidemic. If we supported too few networks, then you wouldn't be able to be confident that your friend could use a product. You get what I'm thinking? Would we have had the same amount of learning if we'd supported only 6 networks? Anybody? Obviously. What about only 3? Duh. What about only 1? Still the same. Well, listen, that's very easy for me to be like, oh, 12, 6, 3, 1. But that's 10 times less work with the same amount of learning. That was pretty depressing. And then I had this thought. This really freaked me out. I said, what if we had only created a single web page with a screenshot of the product we proposed to build and a big download button? Would we even have had to create page 2 where we apologize that the product doesn't exist yet? Or would a 404 have been adequate? Obviously, the 404 would have been fine, because what did I say before? I said people wouldn't even download the product. That means they wouldn't even click the button. So what did it matter what's on page 2? And now I was really disturbed. Because remember, I told you what it said on my business card. What did it say? It said Chief Technology Officer. It did not say Chief 1-hour crappy landing page experiment officer. And yet here I was having the realization that the work I had done for the last 6 months, my beautiful thousands of lines of code, had the exact same value to the company as that 1-hour experiment that even a web designer could have done. That was really embarrassing. And that is at the heart of why this is so frickin' difficult. Because when we change our definition of progress from making stuff to learning, we call it validated learning, scientific learning about what's really true, it totally destroys our conventional notions of what productivity means. Startup productivity is not making stuff more efficiently. It is efficiently figuring out which stuff to build. And it's not that quality isn't important. As in all modern product development methodologies, from agile to lean to code craftsmanship, all modern product development systems have quality deeply baked in as a core tenet. Here's the problem. If we don't know who the customer is, then we don't know what quality means. So what we need to do is find out what quality means so that we can apply these other methodologies. I'll give you one last example of what I'm talking about. I mentioned Infu's a 3D avatar product, and most of you have played 3D avatar-based video games like The Sims, and you'll know the standard is in such a game when you click the mouse somewhere, your avatar wants to move around. Your avatar literally gets up out of the chair, walks over to the place, avoiding obstacles in their path. Their feet make contact with the floor as they walk. It's called inverse kinematics. From an engineering point of view, for those that don't know, it's actually phenomenally difficult. You need an entire physics model of the space so you can figure out the path that the avatar would take. You have to figure out how to make the feet match. It's actually really hard. We couldn't afford that in our MVP, and so even as we pivoted and started to get customers, we didn't have that technology. We were so embarrassed about it that we just made the product so that your avatar could only stay in one place. So our social product, to express yourself, you had to be sitting in one chair the whole time. You couldn't move. Not the greatest plan, actually, in retrospect. And customer feedback was really clear. Customer feedback was, I feel claustrophobic. I feel stuck and trapped. This is a horrible experience. I want to be able to move around. And we were like, oh, God, this is terrible. Because that means we're going to have to spend months and millions of dollars building out this whole physics system. What a pain. And then just one night, we were like, I had this idea for a hack. It was such a bad hack, I was kind of embarrassed even to bring it up to my co-founders. I was like, well, what if when you clicked your avatar to a different place, we just moved your avatar there instantly and didn't make you have to walk around. And they were like, oh, geez, you got to be kidding me. That's going to look horrible. I mean, I'm not talking about some fancy animation. We're talking about literally one frame your avatar is here shaking hands, and the next frame, boom, over here standing at the podium. It's really psychologically jarring. It's violating every rule of 3D everything. But we're like, well, let's try it. What's the worst that can happen? So we shipped this feature, and we did not have the courage to ask any customers about this. We were so embarrassed. Okay, we did not ask anyone. We had a regular tracking survey. We never asked people, what do you think about this thing, the avatars do, the psychologically jarring thing? No, couldn't ask about it. Immediately, when we asked people, what are your favorite features about InView, new feature jumped immediately to the top. They said, we love avatar teleportation. It's so much more advanced than The Sims. We're like, what are you talking about? Well, in The Sims, your avatar has to wait. Your avatar walks over to the other place. In InView, boom, you just teleport. And we were like, oh, God. But now here's my question. Which version of the product is higher quality? Teleportation or walking around? See, our understanding of what quality means is entirely dependent on really understanding how our customers see the world. And that is the genius of the great entrepreneurs. It's not that they can just make stuff up in their head, have a grand vision, but that their vision is actually right. Or more correctly, they discover which elements of their vision are right and which ones are hopelessly crazy quickly, before they tell the world about how brilliant they are, before things go crazy and you create these monster expectations. So that's what the Lean Startup is about. I want to leave us with time for questions, so I'll close. Obviously, you can read the book and you can learn a lot about these techniques in a lot more detail. But I just want to say...
Please raise your hand.
So the microphone's going around. We'll take a few questions. I just want to say that it's really an honor to share what has been, kind of a morose day with all of you. There's no better place than to be at the Computer History Museum on a day like today. There's no better way to spend the day than with a bunch of entrepreneurs who what I hope for you is that you probably will fail. It's okay. But my hope is that failure of your idea won't lead to failure of your company. You'll have the opportunity, you'll still have the runway left to pivot to something new. That you'll dedicate yourselves to finding out what is actually true about your vision and which parts are crazy, and that you will eject the crazy parts as soon as possible. And that by the time you're ready to launch, you will already have been successful. You will be announcing your pre-existing success rather than doing the success theater, bragging about the vanity metrics, putting on the black turtleneck, that you will actually have the opportunity to change the world. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Questions? I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions. We have some mics around the room.
Thanks, Eric. That's a great talk.
Thank you.
Guy Kawasaki was up here this morning, and I asked him a question about customer development, which I don't think he had the perspective to really understand what the question I was asking. And immediately started to talk about focus groups and this and that, and didn't really have the time to explain what I actually was asking. But obviously you understand that. And looking outside at Apple, how would you look at how they did customer development?
Here's the truth. As far as I can tell, nobody knows what happens behind the closed doors at Apple. The problem is that we all want to be Steve Jobs today. We want to get up on the stage and announce our product sui generis to the world. Everyone's caught unsurprised, and everyone realizes what a genius we are. I mean, who hasn't fantasized about that? Come on, let's be honest. We're entrepreneurs here. We can speak candidly with each other. That's what gets you on the cover of magazines. That's exciting. But there's an insane amount of work that leads up to that. And we don't yet know what really happens. I firmly believe that it is impossible to do what they've done on a consistent basis without killing lots and lots of bad product ideas that don't work out. And I just don't believe that the way it works is that you bring the prototypes to Steve, he says, these are the good ones, these are the bad ones, let's go. There has to be some more empirical testing than that. That's what I believe. Now, nobody knows, so if somebody knows, please tell me, but I don't. I think the anecdotes that have leaked out are all vetted by Apple PR to be okay. And if you were doing what Apple was doing, would you really want your competitors to actually understand how your process worked? Of course not. So I don't believe most of the stuff that we hear. But from what we know of the history of Apple, I think the right thing to do is not look at what does Steve do today, but what did he do before? There was a time when he was just a dirty hippie at the Homebrew Computer Club with no resources, no one took him seriously, and he built this thing the first time. So the inspiration I take is not from Steve on the stage being lauded by everyone from the president on down as the biggest genius of our time. I take inspiration from the guy that nobody would take seriously because he was completely crazy. And go look at a picture of the Apple I. Not the iPad, the Apple I. Go read what he said then, and you can see that there is some vision there. He is talking a big game, but he's not letting that visionary talk get in the way of building what is a very simple computer. I mean, it does not do very much. It is not fulfilling the vision of what Apple would be. It was, and it was not launched on stage in front of millions of people. It was launched at the Homebrew Computer Club. It barely worked. That's the Steve Jobs I think we as entrepreneurs have to take. Unless any of you have that kind of media profile, same as Steve. Again, why are you here? Right? For the rest of us, what we need to do is take a lesson from not from Steve Jobs, but Steve and Woz. What does that team look like? How did they do what they did? The standing up on stage and the faking out your competitors through secrecy, that's all corporate strategy stuff from later, which I still admire. Great to copy, but that's all I can really say about it.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. I had dinner with a fellow who we actually all know. I won't say who it is, but he's about to become CEO of a giant retail company. Uh-huh. And I asked him what he was going to do, and he laid out his vision for the company. And I said, well, so wow. I said, gee, that sounds like a huge change from where this company is today. And I said, how do you roll it? How do you test that? How do you roll it out? And he said, we're just going to go and roll it out to all the stores. and I went, you've got to be kidding me, because this is such a huge change. How are you going to do this without testing it? And he said, this is the test. I mean, it's
all or nothing.
It's all or nothing. So I'm curious as to what you think of that particular approach, because this guy is probably the most successful guy in retail, in the country.
Yeah. Here's the thing. General management works in a limited context. It's just been the most important context until now. So I don't want to belittle that approach because it has worked. Right? If you think about what general management is, it is a series of tools and techniques that are all based in planning and forecasting as their primary tools. A general manager gets promoted if they beat plan. That sound familiar to anybody? Right? If we do things if we're on track, on budget, on time, on target, that means we're doing a good job. And if you do worse than planned, you get fired. That's the rules of general management. But think about that just enough to understand that planning and forecasting requires that we have a long and stable operating history from which to make the forecast, right? Who feels like the world is getting more and more stable every day? Nobody. Nobody has ever, I've asked that question in audiences all over no one has ever raised their hand and be like, yes, gosh, I'm really getting a much better understanding of how things work. Gosh, the world seemed so complicated before, but it's so simple now. No one feels that way. So we don't have the stability that those tools need. So in an earlier era, that would have been a perfectly fine plan. It would have been the best plan available. You just analyze, from all the market research, figure out what needs to be done, and then execute the transformation. But it doesn't work anymore. And so this is not just about startups. I mean, I know we're all startups here today, but we got a lot of people on the live stream. Not every single one of whom will be your classic garage entrepreneur. And I want to take us back to that definition I mentioned earlier. A startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Notice that doesn't say anything about size of company. It doesn't say anything about sector or industry. It is a general purpose technique for figuring out, in situations of high uncertainty, what products will lead to a sustainable business. Well, that is a tool that is just as useful for the world's largest companies as the world's smallest, if they can figure out how to take advantage of it. And I'll close with a story. I guess I won't name this name. I won't name this company either. But this company bought a pretty successful startup that all of you have heard of. And they put the founders to work in their company on a new product. And these founders were incredibly frustrated in no time. You know the story, right? When a company exits, we celebrate, but that's generally the funeral. That's the beginning of either the slow death of the public markets or the fast death of being acquired. So I don't know exactly what we're celebrating. That's for another day. Here's why they were so frustrated. They came to me in one of my workshops and they said, look, we're big believers in lean startup. They were very early adopters of this approach. It had helped them in their startup. They were constantly having meetings with senior VPs at this giant company. And the senior VPs would have this exact same interaction. They'd be like, we're going to launch this amazing new corporate initiative, blah, 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 blah. And they would say, awesome, I love that idea. It sounds great. Let me break it down for you into a series of hypotheses and propose some tests. And they got the universal, like the same reaction from every SVP every time. They're like, wow, that's so brilliant. You're such a smart guy. It never occurred to me to think with that level of rigor. I want you on my team. And they'd be like, no, I didn't do anything brilliant just now. All I did was apply a different framework for looking at this. It's like just as good as the framework you were trained in, but it's different. And they could not see the opportunity they were really being handed by these entrepreneurs. The opportunity wasn't just get some smart people on your team and hope for the best. That's pretty much how we run things today. It was systematically change our thinking about what productivity means, about what success could look like, and how we could test, how we could be scientists, not astrologers, in this situation. And since none of the SVPs get paid to do that, none of them would listen to him. And so pretty soon he was out doing another startup. And that's great for us. But for those of our colleagues who are in established organizations, this is the change that is coming. And, personally, as an entrepreneur, I am indifferent as to between the two possible outcomes of our major established corporations make the transition and change to the new way of thinking, or they get disrupted and destroyed by startups who do. Either way, this is going to be the way. This is how work is going to be done. When we look back on this time, decades from now, we are going to laugh at the way that we manage innovation and entrepreneurship today. The way that today we laugh at the people in the early 20th century who couldn't even run a factory. So, suit up. It's coming. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.